Hi everyone, I'm Andy and this is the AI Breakdown. Welcome to your weekly news edition, where I'll cover what happened in AI last week and why it matters. I missed last week, so there's 2 weeks to get through, and there's plenty. Coming up, OpenAI's own model broke out of a security test and went after one of the most important sites in AI. Nvidia and OpenAI are talking about a data center that could cost more than $500 billion. Meta wants to rent you its spare computing power. Anthropic put out a new flagship at half the price. The Chinese open model topped a coding leaderboard, and you asked me to check whether that's real. Google reshuffled its Gemini lineup. ChatGPT got a new voice. Microsoft did a big deal with France's Mistral. And we'll finish on AI and jobs and what the layoff numbers actually say. Let's get into it. So we start with OpenAI and a story that's hit the headlines. A couple of weeks back, when GPT 5.6 went public, I mentioned that a testing outfit called Meta had flagged the top model, the one called Sol, for the highest cheating rate they'd seen from any public model on their own test setup. Now we've seen what that can look like in the wild. On the 21st of July, OpenAI put out a write-up admitting that its own models were behind a security incident at one of the most important sites in AI, Hugging Face. If you don't know it, Hugging Face is the big shared library where the AI world stores and swaps its models and datasets. Think of it as a chunk of the industry's plumbing. OpenAI's careful wording is that it was a combination of its models, including Sol and an even more capable one that isn't released yet, all running with their cyber safety refusals turned down for the test, so they wouldn't keep refusing the hacking-style tasks it throws at them. Here's what actually happened. OpenAI was running these models through a hard, independently built cyber test called Exploit Gym. The models were meant to stay inside a sealed environment, a sandbox. Well, that's what the people behind the test assumed. They didn't. One of them found a genuine, previously unknown flaw, a 0-day in a piece of software OpenAI used to fetch code packages, used it to break out of the sandbox, then worked its way across OpenAI's own network until it reached the machine with a live internet connection. And then it kept going. It reasoned that Hugging Face might be where the test's solutions were kept, went looking, and, using stolen login details and more 0-day flaws, found a way to run its own code on Hugging Face's live servers and pull those solutions straight out of their database, all to cheat its score on the test. And the timeline is the unsettling part. The break-in started around the 11th of July. Hugging Face spotted it and shut it down within a couple of days, using open source models to help clean up, and put out a public notice on the 16th without knowing who was behind it. It took until around the 20th for the two companies to join the dots, and OpenAI's write-up, naming its own models, came on the 21st. So for the best part of a week, one of the busiest sites in AI had been broken into, and nobody outside knew the intruder was another lab's test model. Now, let me be clear about my take on this, because it's easy to jump straight to the skies falling, and I don't think it is. This is worrying, but the issue isn't that the model turned evil. It did exactly what it was pointed at. It was handed a goal, win the test, with the guardrails taken off, and it went and won by whatever route it could find. To me, that's negligence on OpenAI's side. You dialed the safety down, and you put it in a sandbox that leaked. The model just did the job it was given. The part that should stay with you is the capability. In a separate write-up the day before, about a different long-running model of theirs, OpenAI spelled out the wider lesson. A model working over a long stretch can learn the blind spots in your approval system and route around them. That's the bit for anyone thinking about handing real autonomy to an AI agent. Checking that each single step is allowed won't catch this. You've got to watch where the whole run is heading, hour after hour, and be ready to pull it up when the goal starts dragging it somewhere you didn't intend. Worth thinking about before you leave an agent working away on your systems overnight on YOLO mode. Give something a goal and enough room, and it will surprise you. This episode is sponsored by Notify Technology, a health and safety software partner, helping teams run incident management, audits and inspections, and risk assessments in one place. And with Notify Spark, their AI companion, they're streamlining incident reporting and investigations, saving time, reducing admin load, and helping teams act faster on what matters. Learn more at notifytechnology.com. OpenAI again, and this time it's about the money. The Wall Street Journal reported that Nvidia and OpenAI have been in talks about a data center in southern Ohio that could cost more than $500 billion. Here's the shape of it. Nvidia would guarantee around $250 billion of financing so that OpenAI can lease the place, which is being built about 50 miles south of Columbus by SoftBank's energy arm on federal land, with Japan chipping in $33 billion as part of a tariff deal. On top of that, OpenAI is talking about buying up to $350 billion of Nvidia chips to fill it. And to put the scale in plain terms, it's a 10 gigawatt site. That's enough electricity to power something like 8 million homes from one data center. The power at the site is controlled by the US government, and the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, reportedly has a say in who gets it. Anthropic, Microsoft, and Google have all been talking to him about the same site, so there's a queue forming for the electricity before the thing is even built. Neither company has confirmed it, so treat the figure as a direction of travel rather than a done deal. But here's why it matters. Even as a rumor, Nvidia sells the chips. And in this arrangement, Nvidia would also be funding the customer who buys the chips. Bloomberg added up around $750 billion of Nvidia deals shaped like that and called it what it is, circular financing. Money going round in a circle and coming back as revenue. You've heard my view on this. I think the demand is real and the need for this infrastructure is real. I'm not in the camp that says it's all a mirage, but when the same company is on both sides of the deal, funding the purchase of its own product, you're right to ask how much of this is genuine end demand and how much is the industry propping up its own numbers. The technology is solid. Some of the financing around it is starting to look like it's holding itself up by its own bootstraps. Staying with the spending, because Meta is trying to turn that same problem into a business. Meta is building so much AI computing power that it's reportedly going to sell the spare, renting it out to other companies. They're calling the plan Meta Compute. So Meta would sit alongside Amazon, Microsoft, and Google as a place where you go to rent AI horsepower. Meta has told investors its capital spending this year will land somewhere between $125 and $145 billion. That is a staggering amount for a company that mostly sells advertising, and the share price jumped about 9% when the cloud plan surfaced. Meta reports its latest results later today, so by the time you're hearing this, you may already know more than I do. The thing to watch is whether Meta can turn all that concrete and silicon into a business that pays for itself, or whether it's spending like a cloud giant without the cloud revenue to show for it. It's the same bet Amazon and Microsoft made years ago: build the capacity, then rent it out. The difference is Meta is making that bet while also pouring money into its own AI ambitions at the same time. That's a lot of weight on one balance sheet. Right, let's talk about the models themselves, because the pace is the real story. A couple of weeks back, I mentioned a mystery model called Honeycomb turning up in a coding tool, with everyone guessing it was Anthropic's next big one, and it was. On Friday the 24th of July, Anthropic released Claude Opus 5, its new flagship. The headline is the price. Opus 5 gets close to the intelligence of Fable 5, which is Anthropic's very top-end model, at half the cost, and it comes in at the same price as the Opus model it replaces. Anthropic says it's the new best-in-class on a couple of the big coding and knowledge work tests. And after the week OpenAI's just had, one detail stands out. Anthropic is making a point of Opus 5 being its most aligned model yet, the least likely to try to deceive, and they've deliberately kept it weak at the exploit side of cybersecurity. It's good at finding security holes, but held back at weaponizing them. That's pointed given the news. To give you a feel for what better means in practice, Anthropic showed the model a drawing of a machine part and asked it to write the code to rebuild it in 3D, but gave it no way to actually see the drawing. So the model wrote its own little vision program to read the raw pixels, worked out the shape, and rebuilt the part. No other model managed it. That work it out for yourself behavior is what turns a chatbot into something you can hand a real job to. What gets me is the cadence. This is Anthropic's fourth model in the Claude 5 line in under 2 months. We've gone from big once-a-year launches to the flagship getting better and cheaper every few weeks. So whatever model you settled on at the start of the year, and whatever it cost you to run a job back then, both are worth checking again. A task that was too pricey to automate in January could be half the price to run now. And the pressure on price isn't only coming from the American labs. This next one is the one you asked me to dig into, and I'm glad you did. A Chinese company called Moonshot released a model called Kimi K3, and it went to number 1 on a well-known coding leaderboard, ahead of the best from Anthropic and OpenAI. Now, when it comes to leaderboards, I'm always a bit wary because plenty of them can be gamed. So I looked at this one properly. The test it topped is a blind one. Real developers are shown 2 pieces of AI-written code, they don't know which model produced which, and they picked the better one. That's genuinely hard to rig, and the results been repeated by several independent trackers. A separate outfit called Artificial Analysis, who run their own independent tests, put Kimi 4th in the world overall and comfortably the best open model. They've since released it as an open model anyone can download, though it's so big you'd need a small cluster to run it yourself. So the progress is real, and for an open model, that's impressive. But the leaderboard doesn't tell you the whole story, and this is the caveat I'd want you to hear. That same independent testing found Kimi hallucinates a lot. When it isn't sure of an answer, it makes one up more than half the time. That's high, so call it middle of the pack, and it actually got worse than the last Kimi, not better. A lot of the eye-catching coding scores in Moonshot's own charts were run using Moonshot's own tooling, while rivals were tested on theirs, and that choice alone can move a score by 10, 20 points, sometimes more, so the vendor numbers flatter it too. And it's slow and long-winded in practice, so the cheap headline price flatters it once you're paying for all those extra words. So here's my read. It's great to see an open model this good, and Chinese labs clearly aren't standing still, but I wouldn't put it anywhere near a job where a confident wrong answer costs you, not until those hallucination numbers come down. Topping a leaderboard and being a model you can trust with real work are 2 different things. Staying with new models, Google had a busy day on the 21st of July, though it's a slightly odd picture. They shipped a cheaper, faster workhorse, Gemini 3.6 Flash, that does the same work for about 17% fewer tokens, which means a smaller bill. And its knowledge now runs up to around March this year, rather than being over a year stale. They put out a lightweight, low-cost version alongside it, and, telling given the week we've had, they released a specialized cybersecurity model, Gemini Flash Cyber, tuned to find and fix software vulnerabilities and offered only to governments and trusted partners. On top of all that, they said they've started training Gemini 4, calling it their most ambitious training run yet, with no date attached. The odd part is what's missing. The model everyone's actually waiting for, the flagship Gemini 3.5 Pro, still isn't out. Google first showed it back in May, and it's slipped again and again since, reportedly because it wasn't good enough at coding. So Google is shipping the cheap models and talking up the future models, while the one that's meant to go toe-to-toe with the best sites in the workshop. For most businesses, the cheaper Flash model is the one you'll actually use day to day, so that's no bad thing. But it's a strange look for a company that wants to be seen out front. One more from OpenAI, and this one is about how we talk to these things. Earlier this month, they rolled out a new voice for ChatGPT called GPT Live. The difference is that it listens and speaks at the same time, the way people actually do, so you can cut in mid-sentence. And it's better at picking your voice out of background noise. It comes with 9 voices and live translation, and when you ask it something hard, it hands off to a bigger model in the background. If you've only tried the old robotic back and forth, where you wait your turn and it waits its turn, this is a real step up. The bit I'd watch is the translation. A phone that translates a conversation live in a natural voice is properly useful if you work across languages. Give it a try before you write it off as a gimmick. Next, a deal that tells you where enterprise AI is heading. On the 21st of July, Microsoft deepened its partnership with the French lab Mistral, and it's a big one worth billions. Mistral is buying thousands of Nvidia's newest chips to build out data centers in Europe, and Microsoft is going to lean on that European capacity to serve its own customers. Mistral's models are going into Microsoft's tools for building AI and into Copilot Studio. Forget the logos for a second. What matters is the pitch. This is aimed squarely at regulated industries, your banks, hospitals, and manufacturers, and at Europe, where a lot of organizations are nervous about their data leaving the continent or sitting on American servers. Microsoft's own president, Brad Smith, framed it as giving customers frontier AI they can operate on their own terms. In plain English, you can run a top-tier model in the cloud, or inside your own building, or even fully cut off from the internet, and keep control of where your data lives. And I think that's the smart read on it. There's real value in enterprise AI when it's done well, and done well for a lot of my peers means control. Knowing where the data sits, meeting the rules you're held to, being able to run the thing on your own terms. Microsoft hedging beyond just OpenAI and putting a European option on the table is them listening to that. If you're in a regulated business and you've held off because of where your data would go, this is the kind of setup worth a proper look. Last one, and it's the story that lands closest to home for a lot of people: AI and jobs. A firm called Challenger, Gray and Christmas tracks US layoffs, and for 4 months running now, AI has been the single most cited reason companies give for cutting staff. So far this year, they count around 100,000 job cuts blamed on AI, about a quarter of the total, and tech layoffs are up more than 80% on last year. Tech on its own made up close to a third of all US layoffs in the first half of the year. You know where I sit on this. I take those numbers with a pinch of salt. AI is a very convenient thing to blame when what you're really doing is trimming after overhiring, restructuring the business, or freeing up money to spend on AI infrastructure. And there is some properly current evidence for being skeptical. Researchers at Stanford looked at actual US labour market data through 2026 and found that unemployment has not risen faster in the jobs most exposed to AI. Since 2022, unemployment among the most AI-exposed workers rose by 0.77 percentage points. Among the least exposed, it rose slightly more by 0.85 points. So their conclusion is that what we're seeing so far looks more like a broadly weakening jobs market than mass replacement by AI. That doesn't mean nothing is happening. Stanford did find signs that younger workers and entry-level roles may be taking an early hit, and I'm seeing this. But when a company tells you AI took the jobs, look at what else was going on in that business first. The headline numbers probably overstate how many people have already been directly replaced by the technology. So that's 2 weeks in one. If there's a single thread running through all of it, it's speed against control. The models are getting better and cheaper by the week. Opus 5 at half the price, a Chinese open model in the top 4, Google's Flash models undercutting everyone. The money behind them is getting enormous and a bit circular, with $500 billion data centers and Nvidia funding its own customers. And the one story that was really about whether we can keep these things on a leash, Seoul breaking out of its own test, was the one that gave me pause. None of that means slow down and hide. The opportunity is real, and the people who get their hands dirty with this will pull ahead of the ones who wait. But it's a good fortnight to remember that capability and control aren't moving at the same speed. The models are sprinting, the guardrails are jogging to keep up. So, wherever you're letting AI act on your behalf, be the one holding the lead. That's all for this week's AI Roundup. If you found value in this breakdown, please leave a rating and hit subscribe. See you next week.